Most Ranger protocols aren't written down. They're passed ranger to ranger, learned through whispers and warnings. But mile marker 21 was different. There was a memo, one sentence long, dated March 2013, signed by Regional Command. Personnel are prohibited from discussing incidents at mile marker 21 with unauthorized parties. No context, no explanation. And 12 years later, they were still following it. Ranger Lisa Nakamura had spent 14 years in uniform at the North Cascades National Park Complex. She had written avalanche bulletins, signed off on road closure advisories, and spent long nights with a clipboard in her lap, trying to predict which warnings visitors would ignore next. She had exactly one instruction on her desk she wasn't allowed to explain. Outside her office window, State Route 20 carved a thin gray line through the mountains. On the map handed to visitors, it appeared as a scenic byway, the highway to the sky, glacial valleys, alpine lakes, postcard overlooks. On the map kept behind the front desk, someone had drawn a small circle in blue pen around one tiny notation. MM21. It wasn't labeled. It didn't have to be. Every ranger there knew what it meant. The memo lay flat on Nakamura's desk, sealed in a plastic sleeve already clouding with age. Government letterhead, bold header, paragraphs turned to black ink blocks. Only two parts remained untouched, the date and that single sentence. People often assumed the Park Service was a wilderness story factory, but most of the job was paperwork and systems. Information moved in three ways. Advisories were the small stuff, notes about a washed-out culvert, a bear too comfortable near a campground, a temporary closure during rock blasting. Bulletins were bigger, policy changes, new protocols, anything that shaped safety or search and rescue operations. Orders, directives, were rare. They came from Regional Command, carried legal weight, and went into the permanent record. Directives weren't interpreted. They were obeyed. There were directives about withholding missing person details until families were notified. About keeping wildlife disease sites confidential until biologists could respond. About sealing ongoing law enforcement investigations. All of that made sense. What didn't make sense was a directive about a single mile marker. Park orders usually covered wide areas, basins, trail systems, entire stretches of road. Nakamura had seen exactly one directive in her career that addressed a single, fixed point in space. Mile marker 21 made two. The fluorescent light above her desk ticked in a rhythm the electricians insisted was within tolerance. The memo rested beneath its glow. She'd read it so many times she could see the redacted paragraphs when she closed her eyes. The rookies always noticed it during their first month. They'd flip through onboarding packets, radio procedure, snowpack hazard matrices, wildlife encounter protocols, and then stop at the plastic sleeve. They'd read the sentence, then look up. What happened there? One would ask. She always gave them the same answer she'd been given years ago. I'm not authorized to discuss mile marker 21. Some laughed, waiting for a punchline. Some didn't. Either way, they learned fast. The directive wasn't a superstition. It was a tripwire built into their job description. They could talk openly about black ice, rockfall, unstable snow, even the bodies they'd found on that road. Those became case studies, training slides, teachable moments. But whatever happened at mile marker 21 never made it into the curriculum. It made it into a memo instead. Nakamura slid the page back into the binder, the plastic crinkling as it closed. The words at the bottom sat like a bruise. Violation of this directive will result in reassignment or termination. The office radio, left on low, hissed softly in the corner. For a moment it went silent. No chatter, no weather feed, no distant truckers on the interstate bands. Then a thin breath of static rose. It swelled, held, faded. 12.3 seconds later, it did it again. The Cascade Loop Disappearances, 2013. It began quietly, the way strange things often do. Just another winter patrol through the Cascades. On February 14, 2013, Rangers David Ortega and Amanda Fletcher were conducting a routine avalanche sweep along State Route 20. The road had been closed to the public for weeks, but rangers still monitored snowpack and wildlife. Conditions were calm, clear visibility, compacted snow, temperature just below freezing. At 14:31, Ortega logged a sighting. Marker 21, vehicle stopped ahead, hazards on. A 2009 Subaru Outback sat angled against the snowbank, hazard lights flashing steadily. The license plate traced back to Monica Priestley, a 34-year-old teacher from Seattle, reported missing 2 days earlier. Inside the vehicle, purse, wallet, phone, engine cold, keys still in ignition. What struck Fletcher first were the footprints, visible against the unbroken crust of snow. They began at the driver's side door, curved outward 30 feet, then circled back in a perfect ring before stopping altogether. No continuation, no sign of return. Not blown over, not filled by snowdrift, simply gone. At 14:47, Ortega's body cam captured his voice, tense and quiet. "Amanda, are you seeing, miss?" "Copy. Tracks in snow, but they're wrong." The pair followed the circle slowly, counting each print. The last step pressed deep, heel to toe, as if the walker had put their full weight down, then vanished mid-stride. Inside the Subaru, the radio crackled to life. The ignition was off, yet the display glowed. 102.1 FM. No licensed station existed on that frequency. The sound pulsed every 12.3 seconds, a low, steady rhythm like a distant heartbeat. The odometer ticked over and reset. 21 miles, over and over. When they returned to base, the report read, "Unexplained mechanical behavior" and "possible electrical malfunction." No mention of the footprints. 2 weeks later, February 28, 2013, a call came from a snowplow operator. A semi-truck had stopped in the same stretch near mile marker 21. Rangers Marcus Webb and Ethan Cross found the vehicle idling, cab lights on. The driver sat upright behind the wheel, eyes open, hands on his knees, unresponsive but breathing. When medics arrived, the man was still catatonic. His truck radio was tuned to 102.1 FM. The same 12.3-second pulse filled the cab. 14 hours later, the driver woke in the hospital. He had no memory of stopping. Only fragments of the drive remained. "I kept passing the same sign," he told investigators. "Mile marker 21. Every time I passed it, the road curved, and I'd see it again. I drove for hours, but I never got past 21. The medical report listed no drugs, no hypothermia, no head trauma, just severe temporal disorientation. On March 7, 2013, the third and final incident occurred. It was this one that forced the Park Service's hand. Rangers Lisa Nakamura and Thomas Chen encountered a family of 4, John and Emily Voss, with 2 teenage children, walking along the shoulder near mile marker 21. Their car, a late-model SUV, sat idling a few yards ahead, fuel tank nearly empty. The family claimed they had been driving home to Bellingham when they noticed they kept passing the same marker. They turned around. The same thing happened in reverse. For 2 hours, mile marker 21 appeared again and again, sometimes 5 minutes apart, sometimes 20. When they tried to walk out, they found no other markers. No mile 20. No mile 22. Just an endless stretch of highway and the same faint sound bleeding through their car radio. Their GPS tracker later showed the vehicle traveled 147 miles in total, yet its coordinates never left a 0.3-mile radius. Footprints and frozen physics. Fresh snow acts like soft plaster. Each step leaves a measurable cavity of compression and melt refreeze. Even moderate wind cannot erase depth without leaving a crusted ridge. A footprint cannot simply stop mid-stride without interference, human, mechanical, or something unrecorded by known meteorological processes. Likewise, FM radio operates on licensed frequency bands monitored by the FCC. Any unlisted broadcast would have to originate from illegal equipment or from natural phenomena, rare enough to mimic a precise 12.3-second rhythm. Psychological theories, hypoxia, disorientation, mass hysteria, could explain fragments of the events, but none explain the identical mechanical failures or synchronized signals across multiple vehicles and days. By March 9th, local media had picked up the story. Headlines called it the Highway 20 Loop Mystery. A television crew requested interviews. A paranormal podcast applied for access permits. Within 72 hours, an order arrived from Regional Command. The mile marker 21 directive. All personnel were prohibited from discussing the incidents publicly or with anyone outside the North Cascades field office. Reports were sealed. Files reclassified. And the pulse at 102.1 faded back into static. For a time, Lisa Nakamura's voice carried the memory years later. That's how it started. A missing hiker, a looping road, a memo that told us to stop talking. And for the next decade, we obeyed. Enforcement and Erasure, 2014 to 2018. By the spring of 2014, the word directive had stopped sounding strange around the North Cascades ranger stations. It had become background noise, like the hum of a refrigerator or the static on a forgotten radio channel. Everyone knew the line they couldn't cross, and most didn't need reminding. Then Ranger Brian Foster crossed it. He had been with the service for nearly a decade, known for his calm voice and encyclopedic recall of safety procedures. When a regional podcast on unexplained phenomena in national parks invited him to talk about avalanche rescue operations, it seemed harmless enough. But halfway through the interview, the host asked about Highway 20. Foster laughed, then said, "We've got one stretch out there that doesn't like to be talked about." That single sentence never aired. Within 72 hours, Foster was reassigned to a desk at regional headquarters in Seattle, administrative capacity only. No field duties, no public contact. His ID badge still worked, but his radio code was deactivated. When his old colleagues asked what happened, he just said, "I broke protocol," and changed the subject. After that, the silence grew thicker. 2 years later, the next breach came from someone younger. Ranger Melissa Tran had been stationed at Marblemount less than a year when she stumbled on the old logs from 2013, Ortega's and Fletcher's field notes, Nakamura's early reports. She started researching on her own time, trying to make sense of the loop references. On an anonymous wilderness forum, she posted under the username Cascadia Eyes. There's a location on a certain mountain highway where physics doesn't work right. Cars get stuck in loops. Radios play frequencies that don't exist. If you stay there too long, time doesn't add up the same way. She thought anonymity would protect her. It didn't. The post lasted 11 hours before deletion. The following Monday, Tran's station supervisor received a security protocol notice from Regional Command. 2 weeks later, she was dismissed for violation of information control policies. Her personnel file was sealed. Her keycard access vanished. To the other Rangers, it was a warning louder than any memo. The third came quietly. Marcus Webb, now a senior instructor at the seasonal training seminar in 2017, was lecturing on environmental disorientation and field safety. Midway through his talk, he paused at a slide showing GPS drift zones in canyon terrain. "There are locations where standard protocols don't," he stopped. A long silence followed. Then he clicked to the next slide and said, where GPS error can be significant in mountainous areas. No one said a word, but several in the room noticed the sweat on his collar. That evening, he added a note to his private logbook. Mile marker 21 is the only place I've been ordered not to talk about. That tells you everything you need to know. The logbook was found years later in a box of training materials marked obsolete. Information control in the Park Service. The National Park Service operates under federal information security standards. Every online activity linked to service accounts, emails, IP addresses, file edits can be traced. Disciplinary actions for unauthorized data release typically involve warning letters or administrative leave. But content-based censorship, silencing field personnel for discussing a location, is virtually unheard of. Rangers are encouraged to publish after-action reports, submit case studies, and share environmental data. Even incidents involving fatalities are documented in safety bulletins for future training. For an agency built on public trust, secrecy is poison, which is why the mile marker 21 directive remains such an anomaly. It contradicts the service's own ethos of transparency. Behind the official justifications, to prevent misinformation, to avoid public alarm, lurks a quieter fear, not of panic, but of disbelief, of admitting that something inside their jurisdiction lies beyond explanation. By late 2018, Lisa Nakamura had seen enough paperwork to notice a pattern. Every case file that should have been labeled incident report or search and rescue was now filed under highway maintenance issues. The terminology shifted too. Audio interference became non-standard field resonance. Looping time perception became temporal disorientation. Some nights, she stayed late, scrolling through the internal database. One entry caught her eye, an unredacted file buried in an older archive, never reclassified. It contained original transcriptions from Ortega's and Fletcher's body cams, unedited. She read it twice, then locked the folder again. Whatever she saw, she never included it in her reports. But afterward, when new rangers asked about mile marker 21, she didn't answer right away. She would just look at them for a moment, then say, "Follow the map, skip that section." The others understood. They always did. By the end of 2018, the memo had done its job. Nobody asked questions anymore. The silence was no longer enforced. It was habitual. The rangers went about their work, patrolling roads, logging weather data, clearing fallen branches. If the radio went quiet for 12 seconds too long, no one mentioned it. Nakamura would later describe those years in her log. They didn't tell us to understand it. They told us to forget it. And for a while, forgetting worked. The pattern that wouldn't die, present day. By the time the winter fog rolled in again, Ranger Lisa Nakamura had already stopped pretending the phenomenon was over. The directive might have buried the paperwork, but it hadn't buried the pattern. It never really left. Between 2013 and now, there had been 14 new incidents along the same 2-mile corridor of Highway 20. The details varied, different drivers, different vehicles, different times of day, but the core traits stayed exact, down to the decimal. Odometers that counted from 0 to 21, then reset. Radios that flipped automatically to 102.1 FM, no matter the make or model. Passengers who lost entire afternoons but recorded only minutes on dash cameras. And in 2 cases, no passengers at all. The Sarah Kim disappearance in 2015 and the Robert and Denise Chow case in 2019 had both ended the same way. Vehicle found idling near mile marker 21. Driver's side door open, no footprints in any direction, radio hissing with the familiar 12.3-second pulse. Each time, the reports were rewritten before they reached regional command. The Rangers logged them as Highway 20 surface repairs or signal interference maintenance. It was the only way to record anything without violating the directive. When new recruits asked about the stretch between markers 20 and 22, veterans gave them the same answer every time: skip that segment, go around. It wasn't superstition anymore. It was muscle memory. Lisa Nakamura had grown used to reading between the lines of her own bureaucracy. Every asphalt degradation report came from the same GPS coordinate. Every abnormal vehicle power drain matched the date stamps of the loop events. What used to look like chaos now looked like an algorithm. She kept her own quiet spreadsheet on a password-locked thumb drive. Columns labeled: time of occurrence, 82% between 1400 and 1600. Audio pattern, 12.3 second pulse, identical waveform. GPS path radius, 0.3 miles, consistent. Vehicle state: engine active, fuel depletion unaccounted for. Occupant condition: disorientation, short-term amnesia, occasional catatonia. All 14 lined up in a near-perfect spiral, centered on mile marker 21. GPS loops and temporal drift. Under normal conditions, GPS error occurs because of atmospheric distortion or signal bounce, known as multipath reflection. These cause slight deviations, sometimes stretching a vehicle's apparent path by a few meters. But even the worst conditions, ionospheric storms, magnetic anomalies, or terrain reflection, can't produce a perfectly circular 0.3-mile loop that repeats identically across years. Mechanical time anomalies make even less sense. Human perception of time can distort under stress. Monotony can compress it. Adrenaline can stretch it. But clocks don't share hallucinations. In the mile marker 21 cases, vehicle electronics experienced the same time loss as the occupants. Battery clocks reset, digital odometers ticked through full cycles without mileage increase, and fuel levels dropped as if miles had actually been traveled. Each component confirmed movement that never occurred. When Nakamura quietly compared her findings to historical reports, she saw something chilling. The 12.3-second rhythm wasn't unique. It matched the same signal recorded in Sector 9, the off-map patrol zone at Silver Ridge Station, where Marcus Webb once worked. And it mirrored the frequency anomaly tied to Campsite 7 at Redwood Creek, where voices had called rangers off-trail. Different forests, different years. The same pulse. At first, she thought it might be coincidence, a shared data artifact buried in the Park Service's older analog logs. But the timestamps matched perfectly, down to the millisecond. The surviving fragments of the redacted files didn't make it easier to dismiss. One line from Ortega's 2013 report had escaped censoring. Subject reported environment became spatially inconsistent. Another from a 2016 maintenance log. Driver claimed road appeared to bend inward. Trees exhibited visible movement against wind direction. And one from a Ranger interview in 2018 said she saw her own truck pass in the opposite lane, same plates, same dent in the fender. The Rangers began calling these mirror slips. They never wrote the term down, but it passed quietly between stations like a rumor that refused to die. Lisa Nakamura still patrols that stretch every few weeks. The directive requires someone to. She drives through with her radio off and her odometer covered with tape. She marks the asphalt edge at mile 20, then again at mile 22, and never looks between them longer than it takes to breathe. Every so often, she hears the faint click of a signal in her earpiece. 12 seconds, then another, always 12. Officially, she files nothing. Unofficially, she's seen too much not to warn others. She knows the danger isn't just in stopping. It's in acknowledging it exists. When asked in interviews about the old 2013 memo, she always gives the same careful response. The directive says we can't talk about mile marker 21. Then, almost under her breath, it doesn't say we can't warn people. The road that loops forever. By the time the new Rangers arrived each spring, the older ones had already learned what to say and what not to. No one ever mentioned the directive outright. Instead, it was folded into the routine, disguised as procedure. They called it the unofficial safety plan. Patrol reports flagged the stretch between markers 18 and 24 as seasonally unstable. Visitors were politely warned of variable weather conditions or limited visibility. Tourists were handed paper maps and told to take alternate routes through the valleys instead of the pass. And every ranger at North Cascades Station knew the real reason why. Lisa Nakamura maintained the plan's hidden ledger, a digital incident counter stored in a subfolder marked Maintenance Logs SR20 Pavement Degradation. Only a handful of rangers knew the password. Each time a vehicle stalled, each time a radio flickered to 102.1 FM, each time an odometer looped from 0 to 21, she added a new line. The total stood at 28. They had learned, over time, not to call it paranormal. It wasn't superstition or myth. It was an operational risk, one that regional command refused to acknowledge. And yet, the unwritten rules worked. Drivers were redirected before sunset. Rangers never lingered past marker 20. The phenomenon stayed contained, like a campfire surrounded by stone. In her private log, Nakamura sometimes wrote what she couldn't say aloud. "The directive doesn't protect the public," she wrote. "It protects the idea that the wilderness has borders, that we've mapped it, measured it, and named it. But we haven't, not all of it. Some places don't follow our coordinates." Every ranger had seen things that tested their understanding of nature. Light pillars during magnetic storms, mirages over frozen lakes, sound waves carrying whispers miles through fog. But mile marker 21 was different. It didn't distort what was there. It distorted the rules themselves. The directive wasn't a barrier. It was an admission that somewhere inside the federal system, someone knew and couldn't explain it. Traveler safety when the road feels wrong. If your GPS begins looping or your odometer starts cycling erratically, do not rely on electronics. Pull over at the next safe, well-lit turnout, shut off the engine and wait 2 full minutes before restarting. If the anomaly continues, turn around and retrace your path by time, not distance. Psychological time drift, the feeling that minutes have vanished or stretched, is common on long, repetitive drives. It can stem from fatigue, monotony, or mild hypoxia. Combat it by stopping every 2 hours, stretching, and checking the clock against your phone or watch. Never stop between unlit markers in fog or snow. Shadows and low-contrast lighting can cause visual disorientation, especially when fog refracts headlights. Always carry analog tools, a magnetic compass, printed maps, and a mechanical watch. Technology can fail, but the Earth's field, for now, still holds steady. Late one night, Nakamura closed her final field entry. The station was silent except for the hum of the base radio. Outside, wind moved through the evergreens, bending them just enough to resemble a breath. Through the window, Highway 20 wound into the dark. Somewhere out there, beyond the visible turn, stood mile marker 21, its paint faded, its post slightly tilted, as if the road itself had shifted beneath it. Sometimes, when the fog rolled low, the air above it shimmered, just a flicker, a trick of heat or distance. And if you listened hard enough, beneath the wind, you could almost hear the faint click of a signal, 12 seconds apart. That night, a lone car passed through the corridor. Its headlights cut the mist like a blade, its engine steady. The driver slowed briefly near the marker, squinting at the green sign as if uncertain. Then, as if sensing something unspoken, they pressed the accelerator and disappeared into the bend. Lisa watched until the taillights vanished. She closed her logbook and whispered softly to herself, "If you ever find yourself driving Highway 20 and see mile marker 21 ahead of you, don't stop. Don't check your radio, and whatever you do, don't look at your odometer, because if it starts counting to 21, you might never reach 22. The memo, the same Park Service letterhead, every line blacked out but one. Personnel are prohibited from discussing incidents at mile marker 21 with unauthorized parties. Then silence. A pulse. Every 12.3 seconds.